Thank you very much, Dave, Jonathan, and Chris for a great set of presentations. And the concept here now, I think, that was a lot of information to absorb. The idea really was to give a very broad framework from a couple of different perspectives about what's going on economically in general in this region, and in particular, what is happening in the real estate market from a broad sort of theoretical perspective. Now, our next panel is designed to sort of bounce off that a little bit and give, as opposed to the 30,000-foot theoretical view, to give a very on-the-ground view of what people are seeing in the market day to day. So we have 5 panelists who all are very accomplished professionals in the real estate, in one case the banking business. And as we get the set change going here, we'll bring them out, but I will begin to introduce them here. We have Sherry Hansen, who's a broker with RE/MAX in Big Fork. Judy Wahlberg, president of the Missoula Organization of Realtors. Scott Burke, the president of First Security Bank. George Lambros of Lambros Real Estate, and Bill McDavid of Hall & Hall. And as they get up here, we created a set here which would be a little more discussion oriented, so we have a little bit of shuffling there. So thank you all for being a part of this, and I think we'll jump right in here. First of all, I'm very curious, just from a general standpoint, whether the panelists sort of agreed, disagreed. I mean, to start with Chris's presentation, which was quite cautious about the outlook for real estate, and does that caution that he expressed in terms of there being a bubble nationally, which will have some impacts here, even if we don't have quite the same dynamics here, did that ring true to you? Do you sort of agree with his framework, Sherry?
Yes.
You have to pick up those mics.
Yes, we're certainly seeing a slowdown in our market in the Clackamas Valley, especially in our land sales.
Especially in?
Vacant land sales.
Vacant land sales? And how substantial has that slowdown been?
You know, it's looking like it's 20%, 22% from January through the end of September.
And do you think that is something that is going to continue? I mean, do you expect a sort of continued slowdown over the next 6 months to a year, or do you think it's going to stabilize?
I think it's going to continue. Part of the equation is land prices have gone up so substantially, even again this year, that I think buyers are holding back, going, it's going to get a little more expensive, and I'm going to hold on to my dollars.
Judy, what do you think?
As a representative of the Missoula Organization of Realtors, I brought statistics from our database. And what we're seeing this year actually is that compared to last year at the same time, the total home sales in the greater Missoula urban area were 1,060. This year it's 1,118, up just a slight amount. The days on market actually in 2005 were 109 days, whereas today, this year, it's 107 days. So not a huge change there, down a slight bit from last year. The median home prices, that's where we're seeing our biggest indicator of change in the local market. The median home price in 2005, from January 1 through September 9, was $188,000. And for the same time period this year, it's $205,850. So those are some of the changes that we're seeing. I think probably as far as the number of units that are being transferred from one person to another, we're seeing that to be fairly stable. We haven't obviously seen a downturn in pricing at this point in time.
So in some way then, can you hear me? No? Jim? Sorry about that. So based on what Judy and Sherry have said, there's sort of a distinction between what's happening in the Flathead and what's happening in Missoula. Do you think that is true, or is that a statistical artifact of some kind? In other words, do you think that really those two markets are behaving very differently?
I don't think they're behaving real differently. Our residential market has shown slowdown, but we're also a valley that a big part of it is resort. Big Fork and Whitefish and Lakeside now are huge resort areas, where Kalispell, Columbia Falls is more of a mainstay. And the residential market in Kalispell has been relatively stable, especially under the housing market in the pricing at $250. But the other areas are seeing some downsides in the residential.
So maybe the resort market is seeing a lot more softness than the core residential market.
Absolutely.
And that would then speak to a distinction between Flathead and Missoula being a little less resort driven. Bill, I'm curious what you see in the ranch property market. And I've seen some things. I know we had talked about, for example, 6 months or so ago, there was a story in the Wall Street Journal saying that the ranch property market was over and that Hollywood celebrities don't want to buy ranches anymore, and that there was kind of a big downturn coming in that, which in some sense could correspond a little bit to the resort market turning down. But what have you seen in that part of the market?
Am I on here? Pardon me if I'm still trying to reclaim my voice from the Rolling Stones concert, but frankly, that Wall Street Journal article, we regretted to see that. I would much rather everybody read the response by my partner Jim Taylor, because we felt like there was a lot of misinformation in that article. And we haven't really seen the plateau that they talk about and the dip that they talk about. It feels like it's coming, but as of right now, we've been very strong, particularly in western Montana this year. It's just been on fire for the higher end market. But again, we have a collective feeling like it seems like there's got to be something that's going to change here real soon.
So you anticipate a change, but haven't really seen it yet?
No, we haven't. The numbers have been real strong this year, again, particularly in western Montana, but our market as a whole, I think our buyers tend to be somewhat insulated from a lot of the other economic factors that are hitting the residential market, maybe the smaller tract land and so forth. We're just, our buyers tend to be very high net worth individuals who don't succumb to those same problems.
Well, and I'd be curious to ask this to everyone on the panel as to whether because the very high end of the market, even though it's small in number, it kind of drives a lot of things, including a lot of construction. There's a lot of big luxury developments out there, and a lot of things on the drawing board. And I'm curious from each of you what your sense is of that very high end, because on one hand, you can say, well, if you've got $100 million, the ups and downs of the economy don't affect you that much, but that's not necessarily true. So I'm curious where people would see that very high end of the business going.
I think our high-end business isn't going to change a whole lot, and that's what we're seeing right now. We still have buyers from out of state coming in and buying vacant land on the water for $500,000 to build a house. They're going to have a couple $1 million into it when they're done building. So we're not really seeing those numbers dropping much right now. I do expect that they probably will level off. I don't know that we can continue the upward swing that we've had for the last 4 years. We're seeing anywhere from 30 to 60% increase in property values or prices.
Well, I think the high end of the market is also affected by what happens with these other regions that we talked about throughout the nation, with their economy and their bubbles. I mean, a lot of that money coming in from out of state is based off of success in other areas. And if some of these areas maybe get into a more critical situation, whether it be real estate or other economic issues, I think it affects some of that money coming into Montana. Missoula's not like the Flathead area or the Big Sky area, the other resort areas to some degree. Hopefully it will be if Tom's successful down the bit of it. But I just see that, overall, I think even our high end of the market maybe could be just a little bit affected just by the capital concerns.
So if and Tom McClay will be speaking a little later, but just to pick on Tom a little bit when he doesn't have a chance to defend himself. If you were, I mean, if you're looking at a development like that as a banker, do you kind of look at that a little bit differently than you might have a year ago? And say, well, gee, you know, are we really taking too much risk in financing something like this?
Well, only reason being is that I think the only, and we have, you know, since late summer, I think we in Missoula and our sister banks throughout the state and the region have seen a little bit of a slowdown since the end of the summer, and I think a lot of that is due more to, it's not really rate driven, rates are still as good as it's been in a long time, it's really more inventory driven. There is more inventory out there than we've had in a long time, and our sister banks and other areas have kind of seen that also, so that comes into play. The other thing that comes into play, John, and this is a bank, the regulatory burdens that we have, you know, all these bubbles throughout the nation are affecting what we do as a bank too, because the regulators are sitting there saying, you got problems, you got concentration. So our job is to say no right now. We don't. You can't compare us to Southern California or Phoenix or some of these other markets. So we spend a lot of our time saying, you know, our market maybe is a little bit different, but it has a little bit of constraints because you're always battling the regulatory side of things also.
So the regulators don't really care too much about our feeling that we're sort of special here. Is that what you're saying?
That's our job to sell them.
So George, you're very involved in the commercial end of the market. You know, Chris made a comment about commercial maybe taking up the slack, but although it's not really big enough to do so. But just generally, what are you seeing in the commercial market in Missoula?
I like to look at Missoula as a long-term player. I've been watching the markets for 45 years, and I don't pay a whole lot of attention to trends. Missoula sort of lags behind national trends. I've seen interest rates up to 18 to 20%, and the lows today are just amazing to me, and still a very good opportunity for those rates. But I think regardless of what the rates will be, we're in I'm going to divert a little bit away from the commercial to just give my profound expression of what makes Missoula specifically the kind of area that attracts what I think has been a sustained attraction. And I believe that there's about 61% of the country that goes through these bubbles, and we're one of those 31% of the communities that is probably more sustainable and predictable. Obviously, we've got the Rolling Stones and the University of Montana Grizzlies as the real reason for coming to Missoula. I think we're living in an attractive area environmentally, and it's generally safe. The University of Montana is a key factor for me. It's kept me at my interest and my attitude towards we have it all here. The diversity of businesses, there's artistic people, there's professional literary people. In other words, the makeup of our community, and then we have the entire region as our playground. It's attractive to the age group that's seeking retirement, and I think that's big. I think that right now the retirement age people are what's going to sustain our kind of community and where people want to live. The regional sales is a question probably that you've addressed to me. Being in the Southgate Mall development and have been with it for 30 years, I thought that when I first opened the mall, the $8 rents were just, wow, that was exciting to me because the downtown rents were about $3. And then it's just grown on a sustained growth to where maybe the averages now have sustained about a 4% growth. And when I think about Missoula and our immediate area, I believe that the trend is about a 4% growth over a period of time. It's not a boom or bust community, and it's solid, and it has, like the Regional Forest Service, it's got wood products, and the area of commercialism is broken into three parts. The downtown, I think, the Southgate Mall, Brook Street corridor, Midtown, and then we've got this new corridor of Reserve Street. And my marketing people, and this is kind of the conclusion, which leads me to believe that we have got continued and sustained growth, I was very fearful about the sales volume at Southgate Mall because of this huge influx of new inventory, but the attraction regionally has caused Missoula to not only grow in customer count, but it was about 212,000 people shopping Missoula, and my marketing people now tell me that there's over 514,000 people that regularly shop Missoula. So our economy from a commercial end keeps growing about at a rate of 8 to 10% same-store sales in this period of large retail growth.
And that's been fairly steady over a period of time. You know, if I could pick up on something you said about retirement, being retirement age people being the drivers of the market, and that's one of the questions I think is to what extent is that kind of the fundamental underpinning? I mean, are we becoming, over the long run, a retirement community, or are the forces more diverse than that? I mean, if you could rate it on a scale of, say, you know, 1 to 4 being totally dependent on retirement and 1 being, you know, retirement is only a side factor, you know, where would you put Greater Missoula in that scale?
I would say, in my opinion, based on the things that we've studied through the Realtor Association this year, that while we're seeing a large number of people who are coming back here, maybe they've come here for vacations or they went to the university here, 20-some years ago perhaps, they are now nearing the retirement age and they've made their money perhaps somewhere else, like Southern California, and are coming back here to retire. But that's not the only demographic group that we saw in the population spikes that we studied, because there was also spikes in the younger 20s and early 30s, people who value our lifestyle, people who value family, people who value community. And those are all things that we have observed both individually within my own company and throughout the Realtor Association here in Missoula County. So I think it's a diverse group. I think there's a diversity of people coming here, and for a variety of reasons. I mean, look out your back door. What do you see? You see friendly people. You see usually pretty clear skies. You know, good shopping, good medical, good schools. Who wouldn't want to live here? I mean, frankly, who wouldn't?
Judy, my question is that second group that you talked about, do you think that's sustainable? About the younger group being a sustainable area only because of our opportunities for job and income growth?
I don't have numbers on employment statistics, that sort of thing, Scott, but I think that as Missoula has grown, and DirecTV being perhaps an example, the growth of the mall, the growth of the services that we see around here, we are now able to provide more jobs for more people. And a lot of the growth that we are seeing is not in migration necessarily from New York City or some other place. It's our own families continuing to be able to live here and afford the housing here. I personally have 2 children. They both have their own households now. Think about your own families and your extension. These kids now are able to stay here. Hopefully, while I don't have a crystal ball to say absolutely if this will last, I would certainly hope that Missoula as a community will continue to work towards sustaining, keeping our youth here, and so that we can enjoy the contributions that they make. So, not a direct answer, but
I did see a statistic recently, I forget what the number was, but Missoula was listed as one of the top 10 lowest unemployment rates in the nation. I forget where I saw it, but it kind of struck me because that's not what I would have expected. We always hear about the PhDs that are serving their drinks at the bar and how hard it is to find a job here, but apparently not.
Well, I think like in the Flathead Valley, the jobs are there, it's just the income of the jobs. I mean, I have 4 children, and I don't know that my children will be able to stay in Big Fork and really earn the living that they could somewhere else. And it's a real problem that we have in the Flathead Valley, of being able to keep our children or our children having the choice of staying in Montana or staying in the Flathead Valley and being able to have a sustainable income. We're also seeing where we used to be a very retirement resort that the people moving into our valley are younger and are choosing because of the recreational lifestyle that they prefer to live in our valley than where they've come from.
I think that this is a challenge that we all face as professionals within our community here. How do we work with these numbers? I mean, we do want our children to stay here. I mean, that's, I think anyway. Some days when my kids were teenagers, I didn't care if they stayed or not. But,
I always wanted to stay too close.
and it's like totally different. But we do want our children to stay here. We want to enjoy the vitality that younger people have in our communities. I think that's a challenge for all of us in this forum that we're here and participating in today, is an amazing dialogue for us to start and embark upon, where we can work together as a community with a common sense of what we want and how do we accomplish it. And so a little commercial for you, I commend you for doing this, because I think this is a wonderful opportunity for all of us to build and grow together for our future.
Thanks, I appreciate the compliment. One thing and I think this is a very important issue about, because obviously retirees or maybe people who left Montana, made their fortune in California, moving back, people like Scott. Obviously that's going to be a big demand driver. Retirement is a big demand driver, and that's going to drive demand at relatively high prices. But yet you have low unemployment, but you have a lot of the wages in Montana and in Missoula remain very low. And the state, and this is a personal, part of mine, but the state spent a ton of money to bring DirecTV here for $9.50 an hour jobs, and I question that as an economic development strategy, because at $9.50 an hour, there are not very many houses you can buy in Missoula. And so a question I have from the real estate perspective is, are we really seeing the demand at the lower end of the market, among that younger cohort that hasn't made its fortune in California? And do we have the ability to meet that demand if it's there?
I think we are seeing that demand, and one of the largest growth factors that we have seen in the association countywide has been common wall or townhome condominium construction. That's been a large segment of our market in the last couple of years as far as growth and rapid growth. Those prices, because of density on the land, they are lower and more affordable for entry-level purchasers. That brings into some of the, my mind anyway, some of the discussion from yesterday where we talked about zoning and densities and infrastructure and the need of, or not the need of having sewering throughout the community. I think for us to continue to provide some of the lower priced homes or housing units, some of those difficult and complex questions that were addressed by the speakers yesterday will need to be thoroughly examined and continually looked at, again, by the community at large.
When you mentioned the $9 an hour jobs being low paid, what's really interesting, I heard this, I've been on a trip, just got back, and I said, well, what was the impact? Was there long lines waiting to get their jobs? And apparently, they're having a tough time filling those jobs.
Yeah.
So that $9 isn't really the competitive, let's all line up and go to the new job. I think, as I've seen Missoula grow, the demand for talent, and to keep that talent, you have to keep raising benefits. You've got to keep raising that bottom line and to make the workplace an enjoyable place to work. I think people tend to work better when they enjoy their jobs rather than for the actual pay. But that's not the real question here. I have a challenge, because I think Missoula is a wonderful opportunity for any of you that are out there that have opportunities that are visionary. And I think if you can think of an idea that Missoula doesn't have in terms of how to develop housing, how to make it more attractive, I think we've got a long ways to go on bringing better ideas to Missoula. And when you bring those ideas, my example of experience had been when I did it right, and when I raised the bar on what I did, the rest of the community followed, but the occupancy and the success of the project is enhanced, whether it be on the low income level or in the medium to high income. Right now, the mall would be crazy if it tried to compete with the big boxes, but we're trying to get the niche retailer. We're trying to keep it updated. We're trying to keep it as the community center. But once you have an idea and you can focus on it, it seems like we're criticized for all the red tape, but that's good. It's made us realize that Missoula is just not a common, ordinary place to come in and put a red barn up and expect it to go. So when you do it right, do it thoughtfully, and have a lot of patience with the regulatory group, which if my experience would say in anything that I've been accomplishing or I've watched other people accomplish is being very patient and careful and considerate with the community and the people in it.
If we can, I wanted to stick for another minute. We'll just do a couple more questions here, and then we'll open it up for discussion and Q&A with the audience. I wanted to ask Bill on this question of demographics and demand. Do you see any changes in where demand has come from for ranch properties? Because there's kind of a cliche that it's, you know, Hollywood celebrities or whatever, but one thing I've heard, for example, is there's a lot more demand for hunting. You know, hunting is a much bigger thing than it was, or I don't know. So I was just curious whether there's any shift in the nature of demand that you've seen.
That's a very hard question to answer, and I'm not quite sure how to, but I guess I could say that for many years it's always been the movie stars are buying up Montana, and they actually have made up, I mean, there have certainly been plenty of them, but they're the ones you hear about. They make up a very small portion of the higher end market that we're dealing with. I just think that's, you know, you hear the big names, and that's what people like to repeat. But I don't know, a shift in demand, they all want the same thing. Privacy, Forest Service quarters, elk running across the lawn, trout jumping on the porch, you know, it's, that hasn't changed at all.
And are the kinds of properties, you know, is more rural property being sold to people looking for those things, or are existing properties that are already in that kind of use being turned over? There's a notion that, you know, the ranches in Montana are all being sold off to rich out-of-staters. I mean, is that sort of true?
The question, I guess, really is how much resales are we seeing of the people who come in from elsewhere? And we're seeing more and more of that all the time. You know, when I started, there was a lot of Western Montana ranchers that were sick of seeing what was going on here in their mind as being a bad thing. And they sold out and left and went and bought in an area where they can get a much higher value for the same dollar. Eastern Montana, Nebraska, South Dakota, Eastern Wyoming. And since then, you know, I'm just selling one right now that I sold 7 or 8 years ago, and it was sold by the original rancher who was a true rancher, and now it's being resold again. So definitely seeing more and more of that.
Can you give a sense of what percentage of your sales are resale versus original sale, as it were?
It'd be total speculation, but at least in the Western Montana market, I would say it's upwards of 80% is resale. Yeah. It's just a gut level guess there is all it is.
Just a last question for Scott from me. You mentioned the regulatory situation. Do you think as a banker and looking at, say, what Chris talked about, do you feel like you need to be significantly more cautious now in the kinds of projects that you finance than maybe 6 months ago?
Well, I think you just have to be more aware. You have to be more aware of what's going on as a whole. You know, for a long time, anytime you have a boom in an industry like we've had, and whether it be here or other regions in Montana, you know, everybody at the time thinks they should become a real estate developer or a subdivision owner, and so I think what is driving the banking industry to do more than anything is being a little more cautious as who you're getting involved with. Right now, there seems to be a little bit of inventory on the market, whether it be lot sales or not. So you're just a little bit more cautious, and you're looking for somebody that maybe has a little more staying power, because if you're totally reliant upon the sale of the lot for your loan repayment, you've got to be a little more cautious. You've got to be a little more patient with your borrowers, and they got to have the ability, or there'd be other forms of income to hold up the interest payments. I mean, that's the one thing about, everybody talks about the risk in lending and developments. Well, the risk is in a down market, and your only source of income is the sale of lots. But we don't see that being that drastic. It's just we're a little more cautious. We're not being as aggressive as probably we were 6 months ago.
So a little less aggressive than 6 months ago.
And I think just to follow up on that, Missoula overbuilt. Right now it's probably overbuilt in the office space. It probably is overbuilt in the hotel industry. But somehow, even if it's overbuilt, if your bank works with you, and it's extremely important to go in with equity, because people who don't go in with equity... But
easy for you to say, right?
In 45 years, that's what the only people that I've seen that they think in the hits and the banks have had to. But in the long run, I think in Missoula, if I would give my feelings to this audience, I would say buy and hold. I've been in the brokerage business, haven't made any money technically in the brokerage business. I've been in the development business, and anything I made it almost in the highs and the lows, you come out with a balance. But if you can invest in real estate in Western Montana, and particularly in Missoula, I think you'll have a good chance of sustainable equity buildup. I disagree with this 0.13% value. I've got a stock market portfolio that sucks, and if I could put in real estate, I'd love to remain in, just put it all there. I just want to do the right thing.
No, I have to agree with George. Even though we're seeing a downside in our vacant land sales in the Platte Valley, I think it's the opportunity, and I think that the attitude of people nowadays is, there's a downward slide. Let's buy some more. And I don't think that we're in for a big bubble here. I think it's going to be more short term. If you look at the baby boomers and the money that's going to be coming into the next generation, there's a lot of wealth there.
Well, when you talk about this bubble, and that's the thing that you kind of got to quantify. What is the bubble? I mean, Chris, being an economist, he probably has a better idea than I think the professionals in the industry. If you talk about history of bubbles, it's typically a 30% decline in value.
And I think with our market in Flathead, we need a correction. You cannot contain to go with an increase the way we have in the last 4 years. It's just not economically feasible for a community.
Okay, well, I think that's a good note to open up to questions. And Chris and John are here, and I don't know if they want to take issue with anything that's been mentioned here. Dave is here to take some questions as well. So I think we got a great group to put on the spot if you have any questions. And maybe I will just. Sarah in the mic t-shirt there has a mic. If you would like the mic, so just signal to her, and she'll bring it over. And to kind of get things started a little bit, I'm going to ask Chris whether there's anything that he has heard from this panel that sounds like delusional dreaming to him.
I have been slandered by many a real estate agent. So I'm relatively used to it by this point in time. Bubble is definitely not a 30% decline in prices.
Burst of a bubble.
That's incredibly rare. We've had lots and lots of bubbles. Very few of them have ever been followed by that kind of price decline. They just don't do that. Like I said, most of the bubble bursts on the liquidity side, and prices just go flat for 5-6 years until things finally catch up. The only time I've ever seen those kind of declining prices were LA at the turn of the 90s, and that was completely driven by the collapse of the aerospace industry, which caused just untold losses of jobs and income. You have to have that kind of event to allow prices to fall. So prices will be stable, but the liquidity side is going to be everything. And, I'm not sure about like licenses here in Montana. I'm sort of already hinting there's lots of people running out there getting their license now. Over the last 3 years, we've had record numbers of people getting their real estate licenses. They're kind of like the real estate kid of today was the .com kid of 1999. And they're going to go a similar direction. In the next couple of years, it's going to be an ugly industry out there on that side. The other kind of places I saw that kind of price decline would be, for example, Texas after the oil collapse in the mid-'80s. They saw those that kind of decline for a similar reason. But, I think the underlying dynamics of the economy here, with the tourism expected to remain strong, with people moving from New York and moving into the place for better or worse, things can stabilize the economy. While I think that the prices are growing at an unsustainable rate, I do not expect any kind of price decline in Montana or Wyoming or Colorado or Idaho rather. Colorado, maybe it's a little trickier situation because in Colorado you have two dynamics. You have the mountain economy and you have the Denver economy, and never the twain shall meet, so to speak. They're kind of a different beast altogether.
Questions in front here?
Yeah, a question for Chris. I'm just wondering, what kind of delayed reaction do you see coming from the adjustable rate mortgages and a lot of the 100% loan to value type lending situations? What I consider kind of the same kind of problems we saw in the 80s with S&L. And what kind of delayed reaction do you see coming from all that? And when's that wave going to hit?
Quick.
Let me get this other mic.
But by definition, mortgage defaults and that kind of mortgage activity are lagging, not leading indicators. So this thing, like I said, is going to hit the bottom 2007, and by mid to late 2007 is when those foreclosures are going to start spiking up, and you're going to find out the true extent of the problem. I've seen reports in 3 or 4 different directions on this. I've talked to people in the industry, guys who are mortgage brokers, who kind of just describe the horror stories behind the scenes. And then I see guys on the other side collecting statistics and writing reports for their title companies, which is a problem, this is bad. The issue here when it comes to mortgages is we just don't know. It's an enormous unknown right now because while you can see loan to value ratios and statistics, you have no idea of how those loans are structured. You don't know if it's variable rate, interest only. You just don't know. You know what kind of resets are on it. And so from that perspective, and they hide that. They don't tell anybody. So you really don't know the risk, and we're not going to find out how bad it's going to be until the end of 2007. At that point in time, maybe it won't be a big deal, in which case the mortgage industry won't change much. Or it could turn out to be a total disaster, and then we'll all kind of, do the hand-wringing and how do we let this happen? And then you'll see some major changes in the industry. But that's going to happen after everything ends. That's a lagging thing.
I have a question for Chris. You talked about the negative savings rate of the consumer, and I wonder if your numbers are adjusted for the large amount of investment in 401k and retirement plans, IRAs, and SEPs, and that sort of thing. I understand there's negative savings rate for disposable income, but are those retirement funds that go for disposable?
You're absolutely right, and let me explain what I meant when I talked about savings rates. Savings rates is simply what percent of your income you're not spending. What you're talking about is asset accumulation, what's happening to asset accumulation inside the U.S. economy. And actually, so we have an interesting situation because people are spending more than they're earning, but assets have actually been going up somewhat, slightly. Driven, a third of the increase in assets is due to, it's funny you should, because I just did a report on this. About a third of the increase in asset wealth in the U.S. right now is due to real estate, and that's the part that's at risk. About the other 2/3 is other kinds of wealth, including stock market wealth. And stock market wealth today, and this is not 1999 stock market wealth, which was fake wealth. Stock market wealth today is real because companies are making tons of money and they're slamming it away because they're enjoying the low interest rates, they're enjoying the low cost of capital, not the physical capital, in fact the computers are cheap. And as a result, kind of corporations in the U.S. are doing the savings for us. The problem is the asset accumulation is not homogeneous across the U.S. economy. In fact, the top 20% of wealth builders in the U.S. have seen a big increase in their wealth. The other 80%, their assets are going down. So it's completely unequal. So we have a group of Americans who are doing very, very well, wealth-wise. Everybody else is not. And the 80% of the people are the ones who are going to drive the economy over the next year and a half, not the 20%. So while overall wealth is going up, the inequality makes that statistic not very meaningful. Aren't you supposed to be asking them questions?
You're doing great there.
All right, thanks.
Let's see, question here? Oh.
I'll just move it out from here. Chris referred earlier to wealth as a risk in the Northern Rockies, maybe the real estate market nationally. What about the effect of that 20%? And Jonathan's earlier point, or I think what I heard the panel just allude to, is a lifestyle choice. Is Missoula County a lifestyle community as the A9 are lifestyle communities? And what is the effect of that wealth on the Northern Rockies for the next 20 years?
So the question, in case some of you couldn't hear, was what is the, Chris alluded to the 20% of the top 20% kind of driving a lot of things, and the question is, well, related to John's talk, is that 20% in fact what is driving Missoula and a lot of other communities in the Northern Rockies as lifestyle communities?
We've been blessed to be located here. This is a blessing. I've traveled everywhere, and I'm always blessed in my feelings when I come back here. My concerns, if there are two, would be, I was given a book at Christmas, it was this thick, and it was called Collapse. And I thought, when am I ever going to take time to read that? But the introduction copy, it was, the author had spent time in the Bitterroot Valley, and he talked about this being the pristine area. And there are a lot of people who are talking about us. And there are a lot of people who have come here who are talking about us, and there are people who are visiting. But the concern that I think was brought out in the book was we're all interrelated. The Western Montana, the pristine valley, the beauty of what we live in is connected to the national economy. We're not isolated. And the other thing is, what is terror going to do in the influence of our future? Those are probably the two links that could bring busts and booms and concerns that we don't have today. But in the book of Collapse, it says that the people must realize that their environment and their basic commodities, the timber, the basic commodities, if communities and nations over history have collapsed, it's because they didn't properly value their environment and to plan for sustained yield and growth. So part of our little part in life is to take note of that, and whenever possible, and I think our part of the community is extremely indicative of what volunteerism is, to bring about people who will give up their time in order to help visualize what would be best for the economy. And I think without the national economy and without a terroristic, humanistic problem that might come about, we're in a safe, beautiful, God-blessed area. And I think that goes all the way through the Rocky Mountains, and I think all those various communities are in that little chain of blessed land. So what do we do with it? How do we care for it? And how do we control it?
Well, I think those are great points and will be themes for the rest of the day for sure. I'm curious on that, the panel here, just as a quick reaction, to what extent, I mean, is Missoula and Western Montana driven by the 20%? Are we essentially increasingly going to be a kind of an elite community really driven by that 20%? In John's framework of these sort of new style, lifestyle communities?
Absolutely. I mean, the Flathead Valley is becoming more and more than 20%. This is where they're choosing to either vacation or live. And it is lifestyle, but it is a lot part of that too is that safety, plus the recreational aspects, that we have year-round recreational here, where Vail maybe isn't as year-round, or Wyoming, but absolutely.
To be quite honest, I think Missoula's really in the same boat, and it's not driven as much. You know, we have the surrounding recreational areas that we can take into effect, but we also have a medical community that is absolutely one of the largest in the entire region, let alone Montana. It's one of the things that this type of clientele are looking for.
So you say Missoula is or is not in the same boat? Is.
Yes.
Bill, do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, obviously your market is, you know, the top 1%, but.
Yeah, I guess I'd have to jump in with the back here and say, yeah, 20% sounds good.
Other questions?
Jonathan, I'd like to direct this to you. Given the discussion that's just gone on about the 100% mortgages, the 20%, whatever, certainly in the A9, the real world portion of that market has been stressed very heavily with 20% for your price increases and so on for many years. Where do you see the A9 resort economies going as affordability continues to be a greater and greater issue? How do you see the real world continuing to be a part of that economy and continue to be those economically vibrant?
No one knows. That's the short answer. The 20% are very clearly driving where I live, where you live, where we all live, because they can live anywhere they want. And as long as there's something that appeals to them on a visceral level, they get off the airplane, whether it's in Missoula, Jackson Hole, Bozeman, it doesn't matter, and they go, I've arrived. And as long as whatever it is that we have has that attractiveness, it's our challenge as a generation not to, A, to define it, and B, not to blow it. Because if we blow it, the consequences will be that those people who can, the 20% who can afford to live anywhere, will go anywhere. The flip side of that is as long as they keep coming, and this is to your question, what does it mean? Well, the first thing, I talked about the suburbanization. We are pushing people out of Jackson Hole at a furious rate. The joke is the billionaires are driving out the millionaires. And it is having this profound effect on all of our communities, on the character, the title of my talk about sustaining the golden geese. Part of what attracts people is the physical setting. Most of our communities have large proportions of public land. And part of it is the physical setting. Part of it is also that small town sense of character. I don't lock my doors. I leave my key in my admission. That's a wonderful thing. One of these days it's going to come up and it's going to bite me hugely. But I think it's that kind of feel on both the human and the physical level that is attracting people, and that's part of the challenge. And we are exporting people at a certain level. I don't think that the fact that a lot of our workforce is moving, say, to the Teton Valley of Idaho, and they have to drive 45 minutes. I don't think that's going to be a big deal. The reason is I lived in Manhattan, to New York City. They created suburbs in Westchester County and Connecticut on Long Island. People still come in. Why? Because New York is where the money is. And as long as there's enough money, the basic market forces are going to say that jobs will continue to be there. At the same time, all these surrounding communities are going to start growing their own independent economies. I don't think that's such a bad thing, but I think the real core of your question is that question of community character. And if all of a sudden it's a whole bunch of wealthy people frolicking around, then that creates huge issues because you lose something very important in the community character that a lot of us were attracted to the region for, which is that economic diversity. And that leads to all sorts of problems that realistically our forebears didn't have to look at, like affordable housing, like childcare and things like this, which are sort of big city problems that we just never had to face before. All that's a really long way of saying that the reason that all of our communities are struggling with this is because basically the only places that really ever had to struggle with this before are major urban areas, and they don't seem to be pretty good, they don't seem to be very good models, and we certainly don't want to learn from big cities because we're in denial, but we kind of like them.
We're definitely seeing a problem both in Big Fork and Whitefish, where the service people and the diversification is being separated. Starter homes now are at 275,000 if you can find one. And you tell me who can buy a house for 275,000 making $9 an hour. It's not going to happen.
And I think in Missoula, one of the things people love about Missoula is that it does have a certain kind of diversity, and it's not, it's not Boulder where you have to have a six-figure income to live there, and it does have a lot of different kinds of people, and you don't necessarily have to be trying to get ahead in the rat race or be independently wealthy or something to live here. And I think that is a big issue to the extent that that 20% is really what's driving the economy. We have time for one more question, and then I'm going to take a brief audience survey.
My name is Grant Keir. I'm with the Bitterroot Land Trust in that same place that Jared Diamond wrote about in his book Collapse. We've been working over the last year to try and communicate with realtors and development community about the concept of cluster developments, and to some extent this foreshadows the next discussion, but it's a question I have for this panel specifically. We've been talking to them about the benefits of cluster development, conservation development, the ability to complement conservation of our best sort of natural amenities with some development and providing housing in the communities. What we've heard back from some of those developers and builders is that they're not convinced that there is a market for this kind of housing. What I'm hearing from the discussion earlier is in fact that we do have lifestyle-based growth in the Northern Rockies specifically, going on in the Bitterroot Valley as well. And some of the discussions we've had with people in the community is that lifestyle in terms of housing is matching what we're seeing in the trends in lifestyle in the other sectors like attendance at national parks and in the recreational sort of community as well. And what I think I heard from you is that some of these high-end amenity properties are now actually being resold. And that's hinting at, to us, this concept that people bought into a lifestyle and they're now finding it's a little bit more complicated and difficult than they expected with some of these larger properties. Starting even at mid-grade properties, 5-acre, 10-acre, 20-acre, what we call ranchettes, and even bigger. They're a lot more work than they had anticipated. Although they still buy into this concept of being in a beautiful place and having a lot of the natural space around them, we've argued that they're more and more, the trend has been towards people desiring smaller properties that are on the periphery of some of these lifestyle amenities. And we think that this sort of cluster development is a good concept. As people in the business of this right now, do you see the trend heading in that direction? Do you think this is a viable alternative for how to start to do some of the development and conservation at the same time, or are we sort of hoping for pie in the sky right now?
I can tell you on the higher end of that market, this concept of shared ownership, if that's what you're getting at, there's been a lot of attempts made at making that work, and in my experience, most of them have failed. I don't know why, really, because maybe it's just an ownership issue. People want to feel like what they have is theirs, but I think there's been some great ideas, but the buying public just has not taken to it. And I don't know as to the idea that people are getting more than what they expected in the way of work. You know, these places that we're reselling, they're not necessarily packing up and moving out. There's a decent percentage of our market of people that are just buying ranches for a few $1 million, and they enjoy it for a while, and they sell it, and they go buy another one somewhere else in the Rockies or down the road. I don't know if I'm answering your question or not, but I'd be curious on if anybody else on I know there's some of these smaller projects like Circle H here in Missoula. I've never tracked that to know what happened to it, but I'd be curious to know whether that lower end of the market, whether anybody's seen any success in these conservation projects.
Well, and if I could just to follow up on that point you did raise, I think it's an important one. So the notion that people are buying big ranches and then they come here and they discover that, it's cold in the winter and, and you have to do a lot of upkeep and maintenance and there's a big job to run a ranch and they get sick of it and they leave. That, you don't think that's actually something that's going on?
Well, so it may happen to some people, but...
Once in a while, but not as a general trend.
Yeah, not as a general trend, no. And I think that's what that Wall Street Journal article tried to say, and that just, as a whole, is not the case. We started probably better than 20 years ago before I joined the company, a management division which was designed to just make it easier for people to think about owning a ranch. What am I going to do with this? How do I put up hay? I know nothing about this. And so we try to get people in. It's not too difficult to find caretakers that are willing to take your headache away. And so as long as you're willing to engage in the annual outlay that it takes to keep the place up, then there's not that much, that doesn't have to be that much of a headache, I'll put it that way.
That's what we're seeing in the flathead, that 20% that's moving in. They're not really concerned about what it's going to take to plow the road. They're more seasonal. It's more the people that move here with a family on a middle income, and they come from the south, or they come from somewhere where there's not 4 seasons, that, the winter is maybe a little tough, and maybe they do leave. But we're seeing the 20%, that upper 20% that are buying and coming in the flathead. Usually they're there 4 to 6 years, maybe a little longer, and the reason they leave or sell is either to buy, like Phil said, or there's a change in their family. Maybe their kids are now in college, or they have grandkids somewhere else. So now the motivation is to be somewhere else because there's grandchildren somewhere else.
And just to, if I could sort of center it back to the question that was originally asked, which I think is a good one. There's sort of two different things. There's kind of the shared ranch concept. We're going to hear from Ted Gilgrid in a little bit about that, and the sort of shared ranch at the very high end. And I think part of what the question was about really had to do with cluster development, meaning I'm willing to, instead of having my 5 acres, I'm willing to take a 1/4 acre because that's easier to deal with. And then, so developments where the houses are much closer together and leave a bunch of open space, that's a kind of that's a way to the future that could prevent some of the things Jared Diamond talks about in collapse. But I think the core question is that really what people want, and is there going to be demand for those kinds of projects?
I think it depends on the price range and who you're marketing to. Those upper people in the 20%, they're going to want their space. We've been doing cluster development up in the Flathead Valley for a few years now, but it's that middle income, and it's been working fine.
You bring up a real touchy subject, so you have to, anything I say is up to my own interpretation at a later point, but kind of like an economist. But anyway, it is very touchy right now as to what to do. And I think, you're talking about south of us being another county, and where do they want to be when they grow up? And that's a question. There's 2 sides of this story, but just relating it to Missoula and the economy throughout Missoula, and being a regional economy, the centerpiece, having the amenities. Where is Missoula going to grow? Missoula has really only 2 choices, south and west. There's not a lot of land available, so to support. I'm just talking on the basis of supporting the market itself of Missoula. I could see a lot of people making it, being able to afford something in the Bitterroot in one of these cluster developments. I'm not saying it's the right way, but it's another way to get some more affordability in the markets, and just for workers itself in Missoula, I think it's a viable option.
Okay, thanks. Okay, well, just to end this morning session on the market, I wanted to take a quick poll, since real estate is driven by expectation, as Chris talked about. And so I'm very interested from the audience, and I'm going to give you 3 choices. One is that the real estate market in western Montana and the Northern Rockies is going to continue to go extremely well, and continue to appreciate at a good rate and continue to perform in a way that's sort of somewhat similar to what we've seen in recent years. The second one is that we're going to have a period of very flat sales and much tougher market, not much appreciation, much fewer transactions. And the third choice is we're all going to die from June 1st. So I'd like to see, just from a show of hands, who believes number one, that things are going to be good? Okay, it looks like about, I don't know, I'd give that about a solid third, almost to a half of the room. Okay, choice number two, kind of stagnant period, nothing great, nothing horrible. Okay, I'd give that, you know, probably roughly the same score, not very scientific here. Okay, number three, we're all gonna die. All right. Chris, you're not even gonna, oh yeah.
Mortality's 400%.
Okay, so we're about split between 1 and 2 with a very modest representation of number 3. So I think that's unscientific as it was. I think that's useful. Well, I'd like to thank the panelists very much for a great job. So we're now going to have about a 20-minute break, and we will see you back here at 11 o'clock.